I'm Glenn Perkins. I'm with the Greensboro History Museum, and welcome to History Lunch Break. It's our occasionally weekly look and conversation about interesting things in North Carolina, Greensboro, U.S. world history with interesting people. So I got a couple interesting folks on board today to share what our institutions are up to around documenting history happening now. I guess it was probably about April here at the Greensboro History Museum, we started talking about the necessity of collecting for this moment, because it was obviously an important historical moment, something that people were going to look back on, in 50 years, 100 years maybe, and say, wow, that was a time of transformation for our city. And we really thought it was important for us in this moment to start collecting stories, to start documenting people's experiences, and to collect objects as well that reflect the time. So that was an important decision for us. And we started our History Happening Now initiative at that point, and it's been going on with different partners. We are also, of course, not alone in this effort, and there's a lot of great similar projects going on around the state. And so I brought together a couple of folks today to share what their institutions are doing, and we can all kind of compare our notes and talk about what's been motivating us and challenging us in this effort to collect history happening now. So I want to welcome Edith Brady, who's the director from the High Point Museum. Hi, Edith. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we got Vann Evans, who's coming in from all the way out over toward the Triangle. He's with the State Archives of North Carolina. Hi, Vann.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, guys. So let's just, get right in and tell a little bit about what the projects are that you guys are doing. And of course, our audience, you guys are welcome anytime to drop a question into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll talk about it as we go along. But Edith, tell me a little bit about the High Point COVID-19 Experience Project, sort of when you guys started it and where it is.
Sure, and of course that is not the name that we gave it. And we started pretty early on, certainly by April, I would say, and in part, of course, because we recognized that once everything started shutting down, mm-hmm. we recognized, like everybody else, that we were in something big, and that this was going to be something we would want to make sure we were recording and adding to our collection so that we would have it for the future. And also because as we started looking back in our collection for things from the 1918 pandemic to try to see what we could pull back out to provide some context for this moment for people, we realized we didn't really have anything. It just wasn't something that, got saved in our area and added to the museum. So we wanted to make sure that didn't happen this time, that we were able to get things collected. So, and we wanted, because we're a local history museum and our artifacts come from our local community, we wanted to make sure that the full community had the opportunity to contribute what they felt, was important to them, and to make sure we were capturing stories from all, different parts of the community, letting everybody sort of add in what they felt was important. And so we started with a Facebook page, or Facebook group, I should say, to try to start collecting, and also added a page to our website as well, where we are collecting information or allowing people to contribute either stories, photographs, things directly through there, or refer people to us that we can interview. And that is another piece of our project, that we're trying to collect some oral history interviews, and we've done a few already. That's sort of the next phase that we're ramping up to, is to go back and follow up on some of the names and people we've gotten to add to that, and then we can share some of those as we get them produced. So
I think it's so.
That's what we're doing.
Right, and I think you talk about 1918, and that was really one of our inspirations was the collecting efforts that went on after World War I, which in a lot of ways was the birth of Greensboro History Museum as a museum. It was people wanting to preserve a lot of those stories and life during the war. Harriet Elliott had encouraged her students at the state normal, now UNCG, to document especially women's work during World War I, and said we need to collect this stuff now in order to preserve it for later. Ironically, like you mentioned, we don't have a ton of stuff about the pandemic, and we can think about reasons that might be, but it was still really an inspiration to be able to look back and pull together some of those stories. And we have found some diaries and other important stories that we're doing. So I think being inspired by the past to collect the present is a really interesting part of this whole discussion. So Vann, tell me, now you guys you have a statewide story, and I love that you've used the phrase "history happening now" on your webpage. It's your story is North Carolina's story. When did you guys kind of begin with that?
Sure. We having conversations about getting something up and running in March, as we realized that we would likely be working from home some, and we had our website launched with a web form for donors to submit how they'd like to participate. We asked some preliminary questions of them, what they would like to donate. We decided to leave it pretty open and not limit really the scope of what we were trying to collect. Ours is also a joint project with the Museum of History, where the museum is collecting the artifacts, the three-dimensional objects, and we're collecting the digital and paper-based products. I think similar to y'all, we started looking around to see what we had for the 1918 flu pandemic. And because we are a government archive, we had a lot of paper-based materials, particularly with the State Board of Health and some of those organizations, the governors. We did not have as many photographs. Most of what we had photographic material were from our military collection as soldiers returned from Europe. And so we recognized we really needed to kind of get up and running and have a platform for people to donate and participate. And because we're a government archive, our focus is, we know we're going to get a lot of government record material from the various agencies, the governor's office, the Department of Health and Human Services, emergency management, and those organizations at some point. But when we your story is North Carolina's story, it's really our emphasis on trying to focus on the personal impact to North Carolinians, whether it be at home or in the we want to gather those stories and see how people have been impacted.
Yeah, and I think it's really those personal stories that have brought people, to us as well. And it wasn't just us as a museum, and you guys can kind of talk about this, I'm sure, from your points of view, but it's people reaching out and saying, I see this in my community, and you guys should be documenting that. Edith, did you guys get some community encouragement in what you were doing?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think the Facebook page has been interesting because initially we thought that would be more of a place where people just kind of share their personal experiences of like, how is everybody's feeling sort of isolated and disconnected from people. And we thought, well, maybe we could create, a virtual space where people could share their experiences and what they're thinking about. And we've gotten a little bit of that, but we've also gotten a lot of just, oh, you need to collect this, you need to collect that kind of thing, which is helpful because it helps us see, what's on people's minds and what they're thinking about. So that has been one of the ways that we've really, gotten a lot of engagement. And then some people just calling directly, and offering things as well.
I think, yeah, and I think it's interesting that you guys picked, chose this Facebook group as a way to sort of encourage both conversations as well as collections. Tell us a little bit about how that's been working.
It's worked pretty well. One thing that's interesting is, as I said, we initially thought it would be more sharing of stories, and it hasn't turned out to be that quite as much as we thought. But it has been, what it has done is given us a way to really create a timeline of this whole experience, because what people have done at least as much as sharing stories, and maybe more so, is just sharing other articles or things that they're seeing on Facebook related to the pandemic in our community, things about like where testing sites are, when testing is going to happen, announcements about, what's going on with the schools or other things. So when you look at it now, if you go back through it, you kind of have a timeline of what's happening and when we've moved into different phases and all those kinds of things that are there. And then because we did it as a Facebook group, it'll be archived with our museum Facebook page. So we have a way of preserving that information, the Facebook experience as itself, which is another reason that we thought that was a good way to go, because it's sort of a built-in way to archive it.
And of course, one thing that really makes this moment stand out that's so much different from 1918, if we're looking back to then, is the way that our lives are unfolding digitally, and that is our conversations, our entertainments, our work, our calling up our parents and our grandparents, and seeing children. It's a lot of this stuff is happening online. Vann, are you guys sort of figuring out ways to adapt to those digital things, those sort of digital bits of history, as well as physical ones?
We are. I think that was kind of at the forefront of when we were getting this project up and running, is how would we get the content from people, and we opted to use Citrix Share File, where after a researcher or a donor has contacted us, we send them a link where they can upload a material. And one of the things that I think has been important is I've always stressed to our donors that this link does not expire in the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. We want to document your experience as it changes. How do those changes impact you? And so I've encouraged donors to continue to upload. We've had a lot of great outreach from our marketing department with some press releases and some good coverage by some of the local TV outlets, and then our social media team. But I think one of the things that I've found that's been helpful is I try to, when dealing directly with some of our donors, is reach out to them maybe once a month to follow up. We're getting ready to enter the start of the school year again. We saw in the spring people submitting photographs of their college students being sent home early as colleges or universities closed, and kids Zooming on class schedules and teachers. And so into the new school year, I want to see what those experiences are like too. And I think ongoing, not know the last and who all is going to be impacted. It's important to capture, I think, the range of experience that people have.
Mm-hmm. And it's certainly important too to sort of capture the range of what's been happening at this time. I think we all started out saying, okay, this is about life during a pandemic and staying at home and all these rules and regulations and quarantines that we had not expected, and how are these going to change life and work. But then, of course, come spring, we had some amazing protests that were all about Black Lives Matter and demands for racial justice. And for us, I think that was when, in some ways, the project really shifted. It was when I was grateful that we decided to name this thing History Happening Now, because there was a whole nother line of history that was coming to us. Do you, Vann, have you guys sort of adapted to that and and looked to connect both the protests and the pandemic?
We have. We decided, since we already had the Your Story collection effort launched, name a new collection effort, since we just thought that the best way to quickly promote our trying to collect those protests for racial justice was to use the platform that we had, and then mention on our social media that we're very interested in collecting this material. In the wake of the George Floyd death and the protest events in Raleigh, we made a concerted effort to collect those, and we've received some good pledges of donations, and also a lot of the protest art in the Raleigh and Durham area. We've begun to receive some of that as well.
What about the situation in High Point, Edith? Have you?
Yeah, it's been a little bit quieter here than in Greensboro and some other places in terms of public, physical expressions or things. But we have had a couple marches, and we did reach out, pretty quickly with that, trying to make sure that we could get, some items from there collected, and we have a few photographs that have already been sent to us, and a few other people that we know have materials, that we'll figure out a time, to get those here. And I think that's one of the things with all of this has been that, because of the nature of the pandemic and sort of the social distancing and things, and we're not open, and is that sometimes it's hard to actually physically take in the things right now, but we are at least trying to make sure we know where they are, and that we've communicated with people to say, please don't throw this away. Use it for while you need it. Let it serve its purpose right now. But when it's done with its immediate purpose, just make sure that please think of us as a place to send that to. So we've got some names and contact information to follow up with a little bit later on. But yeah, we definitely have been keeping our eyes on all that activity as well.
Yeah, and I think that you get to an important point too, with sort of the collecting now and what it means to sort of get the stuff now, but you don't want to get the stuff that people are using now, or certainly with something like PPE, to go back to the protests. One thing that we've actually gone out to collect here in Greensboro was a lot of the boards that were covering the South Elm Street storefronts after the protests, that artists and organizers and just the community turned into these kind of amazing works of art. And so we've been collecting those physically, in part because, they were coming down off the stores, and, people on South Elm Street were reaching out to us as the museum and saying, okay, let's, we need a place for these to go so they don't get lost. And so we've been working to actually find a way to put those on display whenever the museum does open. But it's also been an opportunity for us to connect with people, I think, and that's been really a great thing. That's connected us to some of the protest organizers, and listen to them talk about their organizing efforts and their stories. What are some other ways that you guys have found like connections between, either objects you're getting in hand, or objects that you might be promised, and sort of bigger individuals or even organizational stories?
I think one of the collections that I'm the most excited about that we've received is from an organization based out of Raleigh called Activate Good, and they're a nonprofit that facilitates volunteerism in the community. And they brought in a photojournalism student to serve an internship this summer, and that was really her sole purpose, was to document the experience of a lot of their partner organizations in the area. Examples would be the Central and Eastern North Carolina Food Bank, literacy programs, a real wide range of nonprofits who are delivering services in this time of need. And so it shows a real breadth of people's outpouring, willing to volunteer and help, and the difficulty of the time as well. This in Wake County right now, this organization is actually heavily involved in distributing laptops to students who need laptops for distance education. And just yesterday, as I was riding into the office, I heard a public announcement, more volunteers to try to help facilitate that. So these are the kinds of things that I'm really excited about seeing come in. There's a lot of really good work being done.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it really speaks to the way that we can talk about the hardships that the pandemic has created, but in some ways still, people want to donate things that represent, the good that organizations are doing. Have you found similar things in High Point, Edith?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the Chamber of Commerce here started or Business High Point is their official name now, has started an initiative, Community First, Community Always, and passed out signs. They have actually their own Facebook group there where some of those stories are being shared, and we have one of those signs. This, for our collection, there was a mask giveaway through the United Way that we've been able to collect some things from. There's a number of those sorts of things that are going on in the community. Again, some things that we actually have collected something now, some things that we've talked to groups about getting later, some things where we're really just even collecting more ephemera, just papers, announcements, flyers, things of what's happening with different organizations, saving some of the newsletters that we've gotten from some of these different organizations just to record, what they're doing in the community. And because sometimes it's hard sometimes there's not a lot of physical material to collect from some of these things. It's more stories or it's more about the human connection or human services, but we can at least get, the stories down, sometimes photographs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think oral histories are going to be really important going forward, and I think really important to collect on the early side of things. We had some great partners this summer with some Guilford College instructors who actually did a History Happening Now class, and some of their students were able to connect with church leaders who are doing things in the community, people who are, again, some of these other service organizations, and kind of do some initial recording of oral histories. I think, Edith, you mentioned before some oral histories that you'd done with students and teachers.
Yeah, we were able to talk with one teacher and also with one of her students earlier in the spring, and find out from her perspective how things were going, and what had been challenging, what was inspiring, that sort of thing. And then what she had recommended one of her students that she thought would be good for us to interview, and we got permission to do that. So we were able to get that recorded, and we have a abbreviated version of that we did actually share earlier on. It's sort of our first attempt at figuring out how to do all this, and so there will be more of those coming. But one of the things that we'd like to try to do for her and the student is actually follow up with them again this fall to see how the new school year is in comparison to the old one, to follow some of these stories through, since things are going on longer. And I mean, that's one of the things that's uncertain about all this, is that we don't know how long it's gonna go. So it's interesting to be able to kind of go back and then follow up with some of these groups, 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later. How are things changing? And that's something I think that we're conscious of also in this collecting initiative, is that this is not just a 2-week event. This is a this is a long stretch. So the experiences may change, how people are feeling changes as it moves on.
Yeah, it's true. Somebody, I think, maybe early in May, had emailed me on our History Happening Now page and was like, "Is there a deadline for this? Are you finishing with this?" And I was thinking, no, this story is going on and on. It's really going to be an open-ended way to absorb all these different kinds of content. So Vann, we got a couple questions about sort of born digital resources and ways that you archive things. That seems to me, as our resident archivist here on this show, you'd be a good one to answer that. Sort of, what's the technical side a little bit,
Sure. So on our webpage, I think the file formats that we could accept, and we have a process in place that once the materials come in through share file, the appropriate archivist, myself or another staff member, reviews them and see it, and just to see, is this something that we would like to add to our collection permanently? Does it fit our collection criteria? And then it goes into, well, we have a formal contract that we send to the donor, where they have to legally transfer the ownership and the copyright of the material. We're a public institution, and we want to be able to circulate materials and share materials freely. So our standard deed of gift asks that they transfer over that ownership. And once we've received that, the digital materials that we receive, they go into a quarantine process, where they're virus scanned and quarantined. Oddly enough, given the pandemic, for 30 days, and then after that period, we add them to our permanent collection. That process is not any different for us now than it would be for another born digital collection. I saw one of the chat questions that came in about, do we have a way to take in like a TV or web advertisement or an announcement or something like that? We, through state government, we have a web archiving program in government materials that are archived. For example, I think this is not a wing that our private donors, but I think, you know, a lot of the information that's posted on the Department of Health and Human Services website, their dashboard, the data, that kind of thing, I think is probably archived and comes to us in a digital format. Outside of state government, we would rely on the donor to contact us and present that option to us. We've had in the past, we have had relationships with Capital Broadcasting in the Raleigh area, where they've donated materials over the years. We have not received any contacts from them during the pandemic. UNC TV did contact us. Their material, though, goes to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And so that's one of those where we coordinate with other organizations to make sure that it's available. And I think a lot of institutions like UNC Greensboro, I'm sure, but NC State and the universities, they may be receiving some of that information for their collections.
Yeah, I think, and it definitely goes back to that sort of, you know, the importance of digital materials, both in this moment and for this moment. You know, we talked to our friends at UNCG Libraries, and they're using some web archiving tools to capture some things, both for, you know, about campus life and digital moments in campus life, but also, you know, maybe looking and finding other parts on the web, because these things that are on the web that we think are there forever, I guess, aren't necessarily there. And so digital archiving is its own mad, complicated, kind of amazing little world that's going on there. And we've been talking too about with a project called Journal of the Plague Year that's out of Arizona State University. That's a kind of a big a global collaborative, curatorial collaborative, collecting digital stuff from all about the pandemic and a lot of submissions. And it gets interesting too when we talk about copyright and things like that. Some of their, you know, requisition, or some of their submissions are going in with a Creative Commons, you know, kind of standard on the license. So I don't know if that's kind of causing some interesting conversations about copyright and use and, you know, and digital commons in the archive world.
I should clarify too that while we were fairly open about what we would accept, we decided not to take screenshots or download materials from people's social media. Send us a link. If they wanted to send us the files, the specific files, we're interested in those, but we're not to take screenshots or or download directly from people's social media accounts. I think we're open, and I'm surprised. I really haven't seen people contact us in that way and say, here's a link to my page. I was at the Raleigh Reopen North Carolina protest, or the Black Lives Matter protest on this date, and I took these. Are you interested in these? We would love to see that. We're not going to download directly from there. We're going to ask people to submit them through the program that we use. But I think it's a great way for people to quickly share what they may have captured, and give us a preview if they'd like.
It is true, because people are archiving their own histories, sort of automatically through their social media accounts. So there's going to be a lot of fascinating sources, I think, as we go forward. Edith, another question here is about, a little bit about the economic realities and ways to document those. I know we here at the museum were contacted by one business that was closing up, Smith Street Diner. Everybody loved the Smith Street Diner and their enormous biscuits, and they got best diner in North Carolina just this last year, and they're had to close down because they couldn't make their restaurant work, or because of the pandemic and the restrictions. So we contacted them and they gave us some items. Have you guys been in touch with any businesses that have really been affected in High Point?
Mostly what we have gotten in terms of donations at this point have been things related to how businesses have changed their product, started producing things. So we have some face shields that were produced here. We have some masks here that produced here in High Point. We haven't had as much, although there have been a few places that have closed. We haven't had as much come from that right now. Directly, although we have asked, we've kind of put out, we'd like to get some of the special menus that are out there during this. People changed their menus while they were closed or while they were doing takeout only, that kind of thing. We had special family meals and that kind of thing. So we those are things that we're still looking for, that we would like to see more of. And and again, we know that people are sort of in the throes of dealing, just trying to survive right now and get through and deal with things. But we're just hoping that at least people will remember us. If they can't deal with it right now, that's fine. But we're hoping that if they can at least reach out, let us know that they have something that we can follow up later when it's more convenient for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's it's important. I think part of the effort here and doing a show like this, or even for us in putting on display the mural panels, hopefully this fall, both online and in the galleries, which is going to have some kind of limited accessibility, we hope, is a way to just communicate with people and say, look, this is important. Your story is important. We're not going to be able to tell the complete, way of this, the story of this pandemic this year, if you guys don't preserve your memories and your experiences in this way of saying, hold on to this stuff, right? Hold on to it, share it with us when you can, but remember that we are here to deliver this past, this present to the future in a way that, when those historians in 50 years start trying to write the history of 2020, they'll be able to say, okay, we've got some material.
And I think that's really important, that people, realize that whatever they're living and they're experiencing is important. We do want that. It's just hard for any one entity to, especially the way, with the isolation that we have right now, to really, and the way it just impacts everything, to even think about or figure out where all the places that we have to go, or all the different ways that things are being impacted, because it is impacting every little aspect of everybody's lives. But our lives are also different, and we're all running in different circles, and so some people just may not see what's happening over here in this different sector, because they're kind of all consumed with what's going on in their own, and that's part of this this experience, but that's why we do want those broad collections, so that eventually when everybody's sort of calmed down and can get their head above water and, you know, take the time to be able to reflect on all this, is for them to be able to see all those different stories and all the different things that were going on, even beyond just what they were personally experiencing.
We're almost out of time, but I would just want to ask you guys real quick, sort of what's one area that you feel like you'd really like that you haven't, or one community or group that you really haven't connected with, that you guys are going to be, you know, working to identify and preserve a story as we continue in the months ahead.
Oh, you know, I think we haven't received as much content from health providers as I would have thought, maybe, or hoped. You know, I think those people that are on the front lines of whether, you know, it's testing or working daily, and I've reached out to a couple of local public health media outlets in this area to see, you know, they're doing some great reporting to see is there a way that, you know, through their contacts that they could put us in touch. But I think sometimes it's our personal contacts. My neighbor is a nurse, and so I see her and I talk to her to learn of what her experiences are. And I think I went to recently, and just, you know, documenting those changes, not just changes for us personally, but in the case of my dentist office, the different kind of protocols that they have in place. I think things that sometimes it's becoming, I think, second nature to me now, but I had to remind myself in the spring that, okay, I need to try to document this too. Hopefully that this will be something that someone might like to see down the road. But I would say just in general, health officials, health personnel.
Mm-hmm. About you, Edith?
Definitely the health side too, and I think it's one of those things too where, you know, nobody wants to bother them when they're in the middle of saving lives, right. You know? So yes, that's an area, and then also just the personal stories of people who have had COVID. You know, we don't really have that either. You know, and it would be interesting to collect kind of the variety of experiences, because we know that this disease impacts people in such a wide range. You know, some people don't even know they have it. Other people, you know, are on the point of dying or actually dying, you know, everything in between. So I think those would be stories that we'd like to collect as well.
There's a lot of great stories out there. And I hope, let's see, I'm going to put links to your projects here real quick in the chat so that people can find them. And we will, of course, invite people to, you know, not just share stories, but even share ideas about the things that we want to, you know, the things we should be collecting. And that's really one of our, again, efforts, ideas with this murals project, is to say, look, we're trying to tell this story, but what's missing? You know, where else do we need to look, and where else do we need to think and pay attention to what people are going through? And let me just thank our guests one more time: Edith Brady from High Point Museum, Vann Evans from the State Archives of North Carolina. You guys, good luck. Good luck going into a new school year, a new season for our institutions, where we're all going to be figuring it out as we go along. So with that, we'll say thanks very much to everybody who's watched us on Zoom, and we'll catch you next time.